What if a lonely old man's final wish could change an entire town forever? Walter Hayes was 79 years old. He lived alone in a small cottage at the edge of Maplewood Hollow. His wife was gone, his health was failing, and he hadn't spoken to his only son in more than 20 years. Most people thought Walter's life was coming to a quiet end, but they were wrong. Because before he died, Walter left behind a mysterious wooden box filled with letters, hidden clues, and a secret that nobody in town knew existed. After his passing, his estranged son, Daniel, returned home and began following the clues. What started as a simple search soon uncovered forgotten stories, hidden acts of kindness, and a remarkable legacy that had been quietly changing lives for decades. But the biggest surprise was waiting beneath an ancient oak tree on a hill overlooking the town. There, Daniel discovered the truth about his father's final wish. A truth so powerful that it transformed his life and the lives of countless others. Stay until the end of this emotional and inspiring story about forgiveness, family, second chances, and the kind of treasure that money can never buy. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what someone leaves for you, it's what they leave within you. Chapter 1. The Lonely Old Man. The Old Man's Last Wish. The town of Maplewood Hollow rested quietly between gentle hills and a winding river that sparkled beneath the sunlight. It was the kind of place where life moved slowly, where people greeted each other by name, and where traditions were passed from one generation to the next. Visitors often described Maplewood Hollow as peaceful, beautiful, almost untouched by time. Rows of maple trees lined the streets. Small shops stood around the town square. Children rode bicycles along quiet roads, and neighbors still gathered on front porches during warm summer evenings. To outsiders, it seemed like the perfect place to grow old. Yet even in the most beautiful towns, loneliness could find a home. At the far edge of Maplewood Hollow, beyond the last row of houses, stood a small cottage surrounded by wildflowers and old oak trees. It belonged to a man named Walter Hayes. At 79 years old, Walter had lived in Maplewood Hollow almost his entire life. Most people in town knew who he was. Many respected him. Some even admired him. But very few truly knew him. Because despite living among thousands of people, Walter spent most of his days alone. A life built by hand. Walter had once been one of the town's most skilled craftsmen. For nearly 50 years, he worked as a carpenter. Not just any carpenter, the carpenter. If someone needed a house built, they called Walter Hayes. If a family needed furniture, they called Walter Hayes. If the church required repairs after a storm, Walter Hayes was always the first to volunteer. His hands had built countless things throughout the town. Tables, chairs, porches, cabinets, entire homes. Even the large wooden gazebo standing proudly in Maplewood Square had been built by him decades earlier. People trusted his work because they trusted him. Walter believed every job deserved care. Every nail mattered, every board mattered, every detail mattered. Because long after a builder was gone, the things he created remained behind. That philosophy guided his entire life, and perhaps that was why people respected him so deeply. The empty house. Yet respect could not fill an empty home. As evening approached each day, Walter returned to a cottage that felt larger and quieter with every passing year. The house had once been full of laughter, full of life, full of family. Now silence occupied most of the rooms. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 9 years earlier after a long illness. The loss had changed everything. Margaret had been his closest friend, his greatest supporter, the person who understood him better than anyone else. For 47 years they shared their lives together. Then one winter morning she was gone. Walter never truly recovered. Part of him continued moving forward, but another part remained frozen in that moment, the moment he said goodbye. Memories everywhere. Every room in the cottage contained memories. The kitchen reminded him of mornings spent drinking coffee with Margaret. The living room reminded him of evenings beside the fireplace. The garden reminded him of her love for flowers. Sometimes the memories comforted him. Other times, they made the loneliness worse. Because memories are strange. They allow us to revisit the people we love. But they also remind us of what we have lost. Walter often found himself speaking to Margaret when nobody else was around. Not because he believed she could hear him. Because it helped. A little. He would tell her about the weather, the town, the birds visiting the garden, the small events of everyday life. The conversations usually ended with silence, but somehow they still made him feel less alone. The son who left, the greatest source of pain in Walter's life wasn't age, it wasn't illness, and it wasn't loneliness, it was regret. Specifically, regret involving his son, his only child, Daniel Hayes. 23 years earlier, Daniel left Maplewood Hollow, and he never came back. The separation began with an argument, a foolish argument. One of those disagreements that seems important in the moment, but meaningless years later. Daniel wanted to leave town. He dreamed of becoming an architect in the city. Walter wanted him to stay. He believed family belonged together. The disagreement grew. Words were exchanged. Pride took control. Neither man apologized. Neither man backed down. Eventually, Daniel packed his belongings and left. At first, Walter expected him to return within weeks. Then months passed. Then years. Letters became less frequent. Phone calls became rare. Eventually, communication stopped altogether. And despite everything, Walter never stopped missing him. Not for a single day. A morning routine. Walter's days followed a predictable routine. Every morning he woke at 6 o'clock. He made coffee, fed the birds outside his window, read the local newspaper, then walked into town. The walk took nearly 20 minutes. Years ago he completed it easily. Now age had slowed him considerably. Still, he enjoyed the exercise. More importantly, he enjoyed seeing people. Even brief conversations brightened his day. The bakery owner greeted him every morning. The librarian always waved. Children walking to school smiled politely. Small interactions, simple moments. Yet they mattered. Because loneliness isn't always solved by grand gestures. Sometimes it is eased by small reminders that you still belong somewhere. The bench in the square. Every afternoon, Walter sat on the same bench in Maplewood Square. Everyone knew this. It became something of a tradition. People often stopped to chat. Some stayed a minute, others stayed longer. Walter enjoyed listening to stories, listening to problems, listening to dreams. Young people discussed future plans. Parents talked about their children. Business owners talked about work. Walter rarely offered advice unless asked. Instead, he listened carefully. And when people did seek advice, he usually shared simple wisdom gathered from a lifetime of experience. Many residents considered him one of the wisest men in town. Walter never viewed himself that way. He simply believed that living long enough teaches certain lessons, whether we want to learn them or not. The doctor's visit. One rainy Thursday morning, Walter attended a routine medical appointment. He expected nothing unusual. Perhaps a discussion about blood pressure. Perhaps another reminder to exercise more. Instead, the visit changed everything. Dr. Emily Parker had cared for Walter for years. She respected him greatly, which made the conversation even more difficult. After reviewing several test results, she removed her glasses and sighed quietly. Walter immediately sensed something was wrong. How bad is it? The doctor hesitated, then spoke honestly. There are concerns. Walter nodded slowly. What kind of concerns? The explanation lasted several minutes. Health complications, advanced age, certain conditions progressing faster than expected. None of the news was shocking. At 79, Walter understood life did not continue forever. Still, hearing it spoken aloud felt different. More real, more immediate. When the conversation ended, Dr. Parker looked at him kindly. "We'll do everything we can." Walter smiled. "I know," and he genuinely did. Yet as he left the office, a thought remained with him. Time. For the first time in years, time felt limited. An unexpected realization. That evening, rain tapped gently against the cottage windows. Walter sat alone in his favorite chair. The doctor's words echoed inside his mind. For decades he assumed there would always be more time. More time to reconnect with Daniel. More time to fix old mistakes. More time to say things left unsaid. But what if there wasn't? What if tomorrow never arrived? The possibility unsettled him, because everyone carries unfinished business. Conversations delayed, apologies postponed, dreams abandoned. Walter suddenly realized how many important things remained unresolved in his life, and among them, one mattered more than all the others: his son. The old photograph. Later that night, Walter opened a wooden box stored inside a closet. The box contained photographs, letters, keepsakes collected over decades. Carefully, he searched through them. Eventually, he found what he was looking for: a photograph. The picture showed a younger Walter standing beside Margaret and Daniel. All three were smiling. Daniel couldn't have been older than 12. The image captured a happy moment, a simpler time. Before misunderstandings, before distance, before regret. Walter stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he noticed something: Daniel's smile. The boy looked so much like him. The realization brought unexpected emotion. For years, pride had prevented reconciliation. Now pride seemed foolish, pointless, meaningless, compared to family, compared to love, compared to time. The decision. Near midnight, Walter sat at his desk. A blank sheet of paper rested before him. Beside it sat an old fountain pen. For several minutes he simply stared, thinking, remembering, reflecting. Then he began writing. The first words came slowly, painfully. But once they started, they would not stop. The letter wasn't easy. It contained apologies, regrets, memories, truths he should have spoken years earlier. Most importantly, it contained love. The kind of love fathers often struggle to express. The kind that remains even when relationships break. The kind that survives distance and silence and time. When he finally finished, several pages lay on the desk. Walter read them carefully, then folded them. For the first time in many years, he felt something unexpected. Peace. Not complete peace, not yet, but enough to know he was moving in the right direction. One final wish. As the clock approached 1 in the morning, Walter stepped outside. The rain had stopped. Moonlight illuminated the garden. The town slept quietly in the distance. Walter looked toward the stars. His thoughts drifted to Margaret, to Daniel, to the life he had lived, and the life he still hoped to influence. Because something important had changed that day. The doctor's visit had forced him to confront a truth many people avoid. Life is precious because it is limited, and when time becomes uncertain, priorities become clear. Standing beneath the night sky, Walter made a decision. He would not spend his remaining days focused on regret. He would spend them focused on purpose. There was something he needed to do, something important, a final mission, a final gift, a final wish. And before his story ended, he intended to make sure that wish came true. What Walter did not know was that this decision would soon send ripples through Maplewood Hollow. It would uncover hidden secrets, reconnect broken relationships, and ultimately change countless lives long after he was gone. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2, The Mysterious Letters. Walter begins writing a series of deeply personal letters that reveal forgotten truths, hidden acts of kindness, and a secret that nobody in Maplewood Hollow expects. Chapter 2, The Mysterious Letters. The old man's last wish. The morning after writing the first letter, Walter Hayes awoke with a feeling he had not experienced in years. Purpose. For a long time, his days had blended together. Wake up, drink coffee, take a walk, return home, sleep, repeat. Life had become predictable, comfortable in some ways, lonely in others. But now something had changed. The letter he wrote to Daniel had awakened memories he had kept buried for years. Some memories brought pain, others brought warmth. Yet all of them reminded him of one important truth. A person's life is measured not only by what they accomplish, but by the people they touch along the way. As Walter sat by the kitchen window watching the sunrise, a new idea began forming in his mind. If he truly wanted to leave something meaningful behind, one letter would not be enough. There were things people needed to know, truths that deserved to be shared, words that should not remain trapped inside his heart. And so he decided to write more, many more. A box full of memories. That afternoon, Walter carried an old wooden chest from the attic. The chest was almost as old as the cottage itself. Its brass hinges were worn. Its surface carried scratches from decades of use. Inside rested a collection of memories, photographs, postcards, receipts, letters, newspaper clippings, tiny pieces of a life lived over nearly 80 years. Walter carefully sorted through them. Every item seemed connected to a story nobody else knew, a story worth remembering. As he examined the contents, he realized something surprising. Throughout his life, he had quietly helped many people, not because he wanted praise, not because he expected recognition, simply because it felt like the right thing to do. Most of those acts have been forgotten, by everyone except him, until now. The first new letter was addressed to Sarah Collins, the owner of the town bakery. Sarah had no idea she would soon receive a letter from Walter. 20 years earlier, when Sarah was struggling to keep her bakery open, Walter had secretly repaired the building after a storm damaged the roof. He never charged her, never told anyone. He simply fixed it. At the time, Sarah believed an anonymous donor had paid for the repairs. She never learned the truth. Walter smiled as he wrote. The memory remained vivid. He remembered her tears of relief when she discovered the bakery could stay open. He remembered how grateful she seemed, and he remembered promising himself never to reveal his involvement. Yet now he felt differently. Not because he wanted credit, because stories like that deserved to be remembered, especially after he was gone. Another name. The next letter went to Pastor Samuel Green. Many years ago, the church faced serious financial problems. Repairs were needed. Funds were scarce. Closing the building seemed possible. Walter quietly donated most of his savings to help, but he requested complete anonymity. The pastor never learned the donor's identity. Only Margaret knew the truth. Walter remembered her reaction. "You should tell them." He had laughed. "Why?" "Because people should know." Walter shook his head. "No." Margaret smiled. "Then at least let me know." They both laughed. The memory made Walter smile now, even after all these years. The secret scholarship. As the days passed, Walter continued writing. Letter after letter, story after story. One memory stood out more than most. Nearly 15 years earlier, a brilliant student named Emma Lawson dreamed of attending university. Her family couldn't afford tuition. The opportunity seemed impossible. Emma never knew that someone paid the first year of her education, someone who believed talent should never be wasted. That someone was Walter. Today, Emma worked as a respected doctor hundreds of miles away. She still believed her anonymous scholarship came from a charitable foundation. Soon, she would learn the truth. Walter smiled at the thought. Not because he expected gratitude, because he wanted her to know that someone believed in her when she needed it most. Why, he never told anyone. One afternoon, Walter's neighbor, Frank Miller, stopped by. The two men often shared coffee together. Frank noticed the growing stack of envelopes on the kitchen table. "Writing a novel?" Walter laughed. "Something like that." Frank picked up one envelope. "That's a lot of letters." Walter nodded. "I have things I need to say." Frank studied his friend carefully. The older men had known each other for decades. Sometimes friends understand more than they say. "You worried about something?" Walter looked toward the window. The answer came honestly. "Not worried." Frank waited, just aware. "Aware of what?" Walter smiled softly. "That time matters." The words lingered in the room. Frank understood immediately. Neither man needed further explanation. A visit to the lawyer. Several weeks later, Walter visited a law office in town. The lawyer's name was Benjamin Clark, a trustworthy man who had handled legal matters for many local families. Benjamin greeted him warmly. "Walter, what can I do for you?" The old carpenter placed a wooden box on the desk. Inside rested dozens of letters, carefully organized, carefully labeled. Benjamin looked surprised. "What is all this?" Walter sat down. "My final instructions." The lawyer's expression became serious. "Walter, I'm not dying today." Benjamin smiled slightly. "I know, but someday." The lawyer nodded. Everyone understood that reality. Walter continued. "When that day comes, I want these delivered." Benjamin opened the box. Dozens of names stared back at him. Friends, neighbors, teachers, business owners, and one name that immediately caught his attention. Daniel Hayes, Walter's son. Benjamin looked up. "You finally wrote to him." Walter nodded. 23 years too late. Among the letters rested a single envelope unlike the others. No name appeared on the front. No address, only one sentence written in careful handwriting. "For the one willing to follow my final wish." Benjamin noticed it immediately. "What's this?" Walter smiled mysteriously. "A surprise." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" Walter laughed. "No." Then his expression softened. "Actually, it's probably the most important thing in the box." Benjamin considered asking more questions, but decided against it. Walter clearly intended the mystery to remain unsolved, at least for now. The old oak tree. Over the next several days, Walter began visiting a particular place more frequently, a hill overlooking Maplewood Hollow. At the top stood a massive oak tree. The tree had been there longer than anyone could remember. Children played beneath it, couples picnicked nearby. Families often visited during summer afternoons. For Walter, however, the tree held special meaning. Many years earlier, he and Margaret spent countless evenings there, talking, dreaming, planning their future. The oak tree witnessed some of the happiest moments of their lives. Now Walter often sat beneath its branches alone, thinking, remembering, preparing, because hidden near that tree was a secret connected to his final wish, a secret nobody in town knew existed. The journal. One evening, Walter returned home carrying an old leather journal. Its pages were worn, its cover faded. The journal contained stories, hundreds of them. Stories collected over decades. Stories about kindness, generosity, sacrifice, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Walter had spent years recording them, not for publication, not for recognition, simply because he believed such stories mattered. The journal represented something important, proof that goodness existed everywhere, even when people failed to notice it. Carefully, Walter placed the journal inside the wooden box, then added several photographs, and a final sealed envelope. The pieces were beginning to come together, slowly, deliberately, exactly as he intended. Late one night, Walter sat alone at his desk. Before him rested the letter addressed to Daniel. He had rewritten it several times. Each version felt incomplete, somehow inadequate. How do you summarize 23 years of regret? How do you apologize for losing contact with your own child? How do you explain love after decades of silence? Walter wasn't sure, but he continued trying. Eventually he began writing again. This time the words flowed naturally. He spoke about mistakes, about pride, about forgiveness, about family. Most importantly, he spoke about love. The kind of love that never disappeared, even during years of separation, even during years of silence. When he finally finished, tears filled his eyes. For the first time in decades, he felt as though he had truly spoken to his son. Whether Daniel would ever read the letter remained uncertain, but at least the words existed now. And sometimes that matters. A plan takes shape. As autumn arrived, Walter's collection of letters continued growing. The wooden box became heavier, not because of its contents, because of what those contents represented. Memories, truths, connections, a lifetime distilled into paper and ink. Yet the letters alone were not his final wish. they were merely the beginning. Each one contained a clue, a piece of a larger puzzle, a trail leading towards something hidden, something meaningful, something Walter hoped would bring people together after he was gone. The plan was finally taking shape, and for the first time in years, Walter felt at peace. Not because his life had been perfect, because he had finally found a way to leave behind something that mattered. Something far greater than money, far greater than possessions, a legacy. The unexpected phone call. One rainy evening as Walter prepared dinner, the telephone rang. The sound startled him. Few people called anymore. Curious, he answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice, a familiar voice, one he had not heard in over 20 years. "Walter?" The old carpenter froze. His heart skipped a beat. He knew that voice. He would recognize it anywhere. Slowly, almost afraid to believe it, he whispered, "Daniel?" The silence that followed felt endless. And in that moment, Walter realized that life still had surprises left to offer. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. A son returns home. After decades of silence, Daniel reaches out unexpectedly. But before father and son can fully heal their relationship, fate takes an unexpected turn that changes everything. Chapter 3. A son returns home. The old man's last wish. The moment Walter Hayes heard the voice on the telephone, time seemed to stop. For more than 20 years he had imagined this conversation. He had rehearsed it in his mind countless times. Sometimes Daniel was angry, sometimes forgiving, sometimes distant, sometimes warm. But no matter how many times Walter imagined it, reality felt completely different. Because now it was actually happening. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to his son. The son he had not seen in 23 years. The son he missed every single day. For several moments neither man spoke. The silence felt heavy, not uncomfortable, just full of memories, full of regret, full of things left unsaid. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "It's been a long time." Walter swallowed hard. "Yes." Another pause. Then Daniel laughed softly. "I guess that's the biggest understatement I've ever made." Walter smiled despite the tears forming in his eyes. "It certainly is." A difficult conversation. The conversation began awkwardly. Neither knew exactly what to say. How do you bridge more than 2 decades of separation? How do you begin again after so many years? Carefully, one sentence at a time. At first, they spoke about simple things. The weather, the town, life in general. Slowly, the tension began to fade. Then Daniel asked the question Walter had secretly feared. "Why didn't you ever call?" The question hung in the air. Walter closed his eyes. "Because the answer was painful. I wanted to." Daniel remained silent, many times. "Then why didn't you?" Walter sighed deeply. "Pride." The word sounded foolish spoken aloud, yet it was the truth. Every year that passed made it harder. Daniel didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried sadness rather than anger. "I felt the same way." Walter's heart tightened. 23 years. Lost because 2 stubborn men waited for the other to take the first step. 23 years. Gone forever. News from the city. Over the next hour, father and son talked more openly than they had in decades. Daniel explained that he lived in a city nearly 600 miles away. He had become a successful architect. He owned his own firm. He had built a respected career. Walter listened proudly. The boy who once dreamed of designing buildings had achieved exactly that. And yet hearing about those accomplishments brought mixed emotions. Pride, joy, regret, because he had missed so much. Graduations, milestones, victories, failures. Entire chapters of his son's life. Moments he would never get back. Still, he felt grateful. Grateful for this opportunity. Grateful that Daniel had called. Grateful that it wasn't too late. At least, Walter hoped it wasn't. An invitation. Before ending the call, Daniel hesitated. Then he asked something unexpected. "Would you like me to visit?" Walter froze. The question struck him harder than he anticipated. For years, he dreamed of seeing his son again. Now the possibility stood before him. Real, immediate, yes. The answer escaped before he could think. Daniel laughed softly. I was hoping you'd say that. When? Next week. Walter smiled. I'll be waiting. After the call ended, he remained seated beside the telephone, staring at nothing, smiling. For the first time in years, the cottage felt less empty. A week of anticipation. The following days passed slowly, painfully slowly. Walter found himself checking the calendar repeatedly, cleaning the house, preparing meals, straightening photographs, anything to keep busy, anything to distract himself from anticipation. Even Frank Miller noticed the change. You seem happier, Walter laughed. Do I? Absolutely. Frank studied him. What's going on? Walter's smile widened. My son is coming home. Frank nearly spilled his coffee. Daniel? Walter nodded. The news spread quickly through Maplewood Hollow. Many residents remembered Daniel. Some hadn't seen him since he was a teenager. Others barely remembered him at all. Yet everyone understood the significance of his return. Because everyone knew how much Walter missed him. The arrival. The following Tuesday arrived bright and clear. Walter woke before sunrise. He could barely eat breakfast. His hands trembled slightly. Not from age, from nerves. Around noon, a silver car appeared at the end of the driveway. Walter immediately stood. His heart pounded. The vehicle slowly approached the cottage, then stopped. The driver's door opened. For a moment, neither moved. Walter remained on the porch. Daniel stood beside the car. 23 years had changed them both. Daniel was no longer a young man. Grey streaks touched his hair, lines marked his face. Yet Walter recognized him instantly. Some connections never disappear, no matter how much time passes. Face to face, Daniel walked toward the porch. Walter walked toward him. Neither seemed sure what to do. Shake hands? Hug? Stand awkwardly? Then Daniel made the decision. He stepped forward and embraced his father. Walter hugged him back immediately. Neither spoke, neither needed to, because some emotions are too large for words. After several moments, Daniel stepped back. His eyes were wet. So, Walter smiled. So? You got old. So did you. The tension disappeared instantly, and for the first time in decades, father and son stood together again, rediscovering family. The next several days felt almost magical. Walter and Daniel spent hours talking, sharing stories, remembering old memories, creating new ones. They walked through town together, visited familiar places, stopped at the bakery, sat in Maplewood Square. Everywhere they went, people greeted them warmly. Many residents seemed genuinely happy to see them reunited. One evening, Daniel visited his childhood bedroom. The room remained almost unchanged. Books still sat on shelves. Old trophies remained displayed. Photographs covered the walls. Daniel stared at them quietly. You kept all this? Walter nodded. Of course. Daniel smiled sadly. I thought you'd forgotten. Walter looked at him carefully. Never. The single word carried decades of meaning. The truth comes out. Several days into the visit, father and son finally discussed the argument that separated them. The conversation wasn't easy. Old wounds rarely are, yet both men understood it was necessary. Walter spoke first. I was wrong. Daniel looked surprised. You don't have to say that. Yes, I do. Walter took a deep breath. I tried to control your future. Daniel remained silent. I thought I was protecting you. Walter smiled sadly. But really, I was protecting myself. The admission felt liberating. For years, he avoided responsibility. Now, honesty felt easier. Daniel nodded slowly. I wasn't innocent either. Walter looked up. I said things I regret. So did I. Both men laughed softly. The realization felt almost absurd. Decades of separation, caused by pride. Nothing more, nothing less. The wooden box. One afternoon, Walter finally showed Daniel the wooden box, the box containing the letters, the box containing his final wish. Daniel examined it curiously. What's inside? Walter smiled. Stories. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Stories? Important ones. Walter sat beside him. I've spent months preparing those letters. Daniel looked at the stack of envelopes. There are dozens. More than dozens. Why? Walter's expression grew thoughtful. because people deserve to know what they mean to one another. Daniel studied his father carefully, then asked quietly, "Are you saying goodbye?" The question hung in the air. Walter didn't answer immediately because both men already knew the truth. Time remained uncertain. The doctor's warnings remained real. Eventually, Walter nodded. A little. Daniel looked away. Emotion filled the room. Neither wanted to acknowledge reality. Yet neither could ignore it. The unexpected collapse. 3 days later, everything changed. Walter and Daniel spent the morning walking through town. The weather was beautiful, the conversation easy, life felt hopeful. Then suddenly, Walter stopped walking. His expression changed, confusion appeared in his eyes, then pain. Daniel immediately noticed. "Dad?" Walter attempted to respond, but the words wouldn't come. His knees buckled, and before Daniel could react, Walter collapsed onto the sidewalk. Panic erupted instantly. People rushed forward. Someone called for help. Daniel knelt beside his father. "Dad!" Walter's eyes opened briefly. He looked toward his son, then managed a weak smile. A smile filled with love and pride and gratitude. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but as it disappeared down the road, Daniel sat frozen, fear gripping his heart, because after finding his father again, he suddenly faced the possibility of losing him. And this time, there might not be 23 years left to make things right. Waiting. The hospital felt cold, quiet, endless. Hours passed. Doctors came and went. Nurses offered reassurance, yet uncertainty remained. Daniel sat alone in the waiting room, thinking, remembering, praying. On the chair beside him rested the wooden box. Walter insisted it accompany him everywhere during the past few weeks. Now it sat silently beside Daniel, filled with letters, filled with secrets, filled with unfinished plans. And as Daniel stared at the box, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened next would change his life forever. Because hidden among those letters was the answer to his father's final wish. A wish that had not yet been revealed. A wish that would soon send him on a journey unlike anything he had ever imagined. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Following the last wish. After receiving Walter's letters, Daniel begins uncovering hidden stories from his father's past and discovers that the man he thought he knew was far more extraordinary than he ever realized. Chapter 4. Following the last wish. The old man's last wish. The waiting room clock seemed to move slower than time itself. Daniel Hayes sat alone beneath the harsh hospital lights, staring at the wooden box resting beside him. Hours had passed since Walter collapsed. Doctors moved in and out of nearby rooms. Nurses walked hurriedly through hallways. Families whispered quietly while waiting for news. Yet Daniel noticed none of it. His attention remained fixed on a single thought: his father. After 23 years apart, they had finally found each other again, and now he faced the possibility of losing him. The idea felt unbearable. For so long, Daniel convinced himself he no longer needed his father. The distance didn't matter, that the past was buried. But the past wasn't buried. It had simply been waiting. Waiting for forgiveness. Waiting for understanding. Waiting for a second chance. And now, sitting in that hospital chair, Daniel realized how precious that second chance truly was. The doctor's news. Several hours later, a doctor finally approached. Daniel immediately stood. The expression on the doctor's face revealed nothing. That somehow made it worse. "Mr. Hayes?" Daniel nodded. "How is he?" The doctor sighed carefully. "Your father is stable." Relief flooded through Daniel. For a brief moment. Then the doctor continued. "However, his condition is serious." The relief faded. "He needs rest." Daniel listened quietly. "There are complications connected to his heart." The doctor chose his words carefully. "We'll do everything possible." Daniel nodded. He appreciated the honesty, even if it hurt. "Can I see him?" The doctor smiled for a few minutes. "Hatched a conversation that matters." Walter looked smaller lying in the hospital bed, older, more fragile. For the first time, Daniel truly saw how much age had affected him. Yet when Walter noticed his son entering the room, a familiar smile appeared. Well, his voice sounded weak. I certainly know how to create excitement. Daniel laughed despite himself. You scared me, Walter nodded. I scared myself. The humor faded. Silence settled between them. Then Walter looked toward the wooden box. You brought it. Daniel glanced at the box. Of course. Walter seemed relieved. Good. His expression grew serious. If something happens... Daniel immediately interrupted. Don't. Walter smiled sadly. Daniel. No. The word came out sharper than intended. The thought of losing his father felt too painful, too soon, too unfair. Walter reached for his son's hand, and in that moment, Daniel felt like a child again. Listen to me. Reluctantly, Daniel nodded. Walter pointed toward the box. Everything you need is inside. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Walter smiled mysteriously. You'll understand. Returning home. Several days later, Walter returned to his cottage. The doctors insisted he rest. Avoid stress. Take things slowly. Walter promised, though everyone knew he wasn't very good at slowing down. Still, the experience changed something inside him. The collapse served as a reminder. Time was precious. Perhaps more precious than he previously realized. And so he focused his remaining energy on completing his final wish. The letters, the journal, the hidden clues, everything needed to be ready, because life offered no guarantees. The final instructions. One evening, Walter invited Benjamin Clark, the lawyer, to the cottage. Daniel joined them. The atmosphere felt unusually serious. Benjamin already suspected what the meeting involved. Walter placed the wooden box on the table, then handed Benjamin several documents. These are my final instructions. The lawyer nodded. I'll make sure everything is handled properly. Walter smiled. I know you will. Daniel remained silent, watching, listening, trying to understand. Then Walter turned toward him. If the time comes, Benjamin will give you the box. Daniel frowned. You keep talking as though you're leaving tomorrow. Walter laughed softly. I don't plan to. Good, but plans don't always matter. The room became quiet. Nobody argued, because everyone understood the truth. The winter storm. Several weeks passed peacefully. Autumn gradually surrendered to winter. Cold winds swept through Maplewood Hollow. Snow covered rooftops. The hills turned white. Life slowed. Walter spent most of his time at home, writing, organizing, preparing. Then one snowy night, everything changed. A severe storm struck the region. Power lines fell. Roads became dangerous. Emergency services struggled to reach certain areas. Inside his cottage, Walter sat beside the fireplace. A journal rested on his lap. Outside, snow battered the windows. The storm intensified throughout the night, and somewhere beyond the darkness, fate quietly approached. The news. The following morning, Daniel received a phone call. The moment he heard Benjamin Clark's voice, his stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The lawyer spoke gently, but the words still felt devastating. Walter Hayes had passed away peacefully during the night, alone in his cottage beside the fireplace, with a journal resting in his hands. For several moments, Daniel couldn't breathe. The words seemed unreal, impossible. After everything, after finally reconnecting, after finding each other again. The story couldn't end like this, yet life rarely asks permission, and grief rarely feels fair. Saying goodbye. The funeral took place 3 days later. Nearly the entire town attended. The church overflowed with people, young and old, rich and poor, families, business owners, teachers, students, people from every corner of Maplewood Hollow. Daniel was stunned. He knew his father was respected, but he hadn't realized how deeply Walter impacted the community. One by one, people shared stories. Stories Daniel had never heard before. Stories revealing sides of Walter he never fully understood. A woman described how Walter repaired her home after a storm. A teacher explained how Walter secretly donated supplies to struggling students. A retired firefighter spoke about Walter's generosity during difficult times. Each story revealed another layer, another act of kindness, another life quietly improved. By the end of the service, Daniel's understanding of his father had changed completely. The man he thought he knew seemed larger somehow. Not because he was perfect, because he consistently chose kindness, even when nobody noticed. The reading of the letters. The following evening, Benjamin Clark invited Daniel to his office. The wooden box sat on the desk, waiting, just as Walter intended. Benjamin opened it carefully. Inside rested dozens of envelopes, each addressed to someone specific, each containing a story, a memory, a truth. The lawyer handed Daniel one envelope. It bore his name, nothing else. Daniel stared at it for several seconds, then slowly opened it. Inside rested several handwritten pages. His father's handwriting immediately brought tears to his eyes. He began reading. Dear Daniel, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer there to say these words myself. Daniel swallowed hard, then continued. First, I need you to know something important. I never stopped loving you. The words hit like a wave, powerful, unexpected, healing. For years, Daniel secretly wondered if his father cared. Now the answer sat clearly before him, in black ink, written by Walter's own hand. The first clue. The letter continued for several pages. Walter spoke about mistakes, about pride, about forgiveness, about family. Then near the end, something changed. The tone became different, almost playful, almost mysterious. There is one final thing I wish to show you. Daniel frowned. He kept reading. To find it, begin where every important conversation in our family once started. The old workshop, Daniel blinked. The workshop? Walter's old carpenter shop. He read the sentence again, then looked toward Benjamin. The lawyer smiled knowingly. There's more. Benjamin opened the box further. Inside rested several sealed envelopes, each labeled with a location. The workshop, the church, the bridge, the schoolhouse, and finally, the oak tree. Daniel's pulse quickened. What is all this? Benjamin smiled. Your father's final wish. A journey begins later that night. Daniel stood outside the old carpenter workshop. Snow covered the ground. The building looked exactly as he remembered. A little older, a little weathered, but still standing, just like Walter. For years, Daniel viewed this place as a reminder of conflict. Now it felt different. Now it felt like the beginning of something. The beginning of understanding. The beginning of forgiveness. The beginning of a journey his father carefully planned. As he reached for the workshop door, he realized something. Walter's final wish wasn't hidden inside the wooden box. The box merely pointed the way. The real treasure remained waiting, hidden among memories, stories, and secrets. Secrets that would soon reveal the extraordinary life Walter Hayes lived. A life far greater than Daniel ever imagined. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5, The Secret Beneath the Oak Tree. Following a trail of clues left by Walter, Daniel uncovers a hidden chest beneath the old oak tree and discovers the astonishing truth about his father's legacy. Chapter 5, The Secret Beneath the Oak Tree. The old man's last wish. The old workshop smelled exactly the way Daniel remembered. Wood, sawdust, time. As he pushed open the heavy door, memories rushed back instantly. As a boy, he spent countless afternoons here watching Walter work. He remembered the sound of hammers striking nails, the smell of freshly cut timber, the way sunlight streamed through the dusty windows. For years, those memories had been buried beneath anger and regret. Now they felt precious. Daniel stepped inside. Everything appeared frozen in time. Walter's workbench remained in the same place. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Half-finished sketches rested inside drawers. It felt as though Walter might walk through the door at any moment. Then Daniel remembered the envelope. Carefully, he opened the one labeled workshop. Inside was a handwritten note. His father's familiar handwriting covered the page. The first message. Daniel, if you've reached the workshop, then you've taken the first step. Daniel smiled. That sounded exactly like Walter. The note continued. This room taught me one of life's most important lessons. Anything worth building requires patience. Relationships are no different. Daniel paused. The words felt personal, almost as though Walter was standing beside him. Look beneath the workbench drawer where I kept my measuring tools. Daniel walked toward the bench. He remembered the drawer immediately. As a child, he was never allowed to touch those tools. Walter considered them essential. After searching for a moment, Daniel found a small compartment hidden beneath the drawer. Inside rested another envelope and an old photograph. A forgotten memory. Daniel picked up the photograph carefully. The image showed him as a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, standing beside Walter. Both wore matching work aprons. Both smiled proudly. Between them stood a small wooden birdhouse. Daniel stared at the picture, then laughed softly. He remembered that day. It had been his first project. The birdhouse looked terrible, uneven, crooked, barely functional. Yet Walter displayed it proudly for years. The memory warmed his heart. How many other moments had he forgotten? How many reminders of love had he overlooked? The realization hurt, but it also healed, slowly, piece by piece. The old bridge. The next clue directed Daniel toward an old stone bridge on the outskirts of Maplewood Hollow. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked. The bridge crossed a narrow river that wound through the valley. It wasn't particularly impressive. Most people crossed it without a second thought. Yet Walter clearly considered it important. Daniel opened the second envelope. Many years ago, a flood nearly destroyed this bridge. The town didn't have enough money to rebuild it. People needed a way to cross. So neighbors helped neighbors. That was when I learned another lesson. Strong communities are built the same way strong bridges are built. One person helping another. Daniel looked around thoughtfully. Then he noticed a small metal plaque hidden beneath the bridge railing. Most people would never see it. Attached behind the plaque rested another envelope. Walter truly planned every detail. Stories nobody knew. Over the next 2 days, Daniel followed clue after clue. Each location revealed another story, another secret, another act of kindness. At the church, he discovered records showing Walter quietly funded repairs that saved the building decades earlier. At the schoolhouse, he learned about students whose education had been made possible through anonymous donations. At the town library, he uncovered a list of books Walter had purchased for children who couldn't afford them. Everywhere Daniel went, people shared memories, stories, gratitude, respect. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Walter spent most of his life helping others without expecting recognition. Not once, not twice, hundreds of times, and almost nobody knew. Daniel felt overwhelmed, not because of the secrets themselves, because of what they revealed. The man he thought he understood had always been far more extraordinary than he realized. The journal. The final clue before the oak tree led Daniel back to the wooden box. At the bottom rested a worn leather journal, the same journal Walter held the night he died. Daniel opened it carefully. Page after page contained handwritten entries, observations, memories, reflections, stories about people throughout Maplewood Hollow. Some entries described joyful moments. Others recorded difficult times, yet nearly every page contained the same theme. Kindness. Walter seemed fascinated by it, obsessed with it even. Whenever someone helped another person, he wrote it down. Whenever someone showed generosity, he recorded it. Whenever someone chose compassion over selfishness, he preserved the story. The journal represented decades of collected goodness, proof that kindness existed everywhere, even when nobody noticed. Daniel understood why Walter treasured it. The final location. 3 days after beginning the journey, Daniel finally arrived at the old oak tree. The massive tree stood atop a hill overlooking Maplewood Hollow. Winter sunlight filtered through its bare branches. The view stretched for miles. Daniel immediately recognized the location. His parents used to bring him here when he was young. Family picnics, summer afternoons, simple moments, important moments. The final envelope rested in his pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, The message was short, very short. Beneath these roots rests the final part of my story, and perhaps the beginning of yours. Dig carefully, with love, Dad. The final two words hit harder than anything else. With love, Dad. Not Walter, not father. Dad. Simple, personal, powerful. The discovery. Daniel borrowed a shovel from a nearby farm, then returned to the tree. The ground was cold, partially frozen. Digging wasn't easy. Yet he continued. 1 hour passed, then another. Finally, the shovel struck something solid. A dull metallic sound echoed through the hillside. Daniel's heart raced. Carefully, he cleared away the remaining soil. A small chest emerged from the earth, old, weathered, protected from time. For several moments, Daniel simply stared, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested no gold, no jewels, no fortune. Instead, he found something unexpected, something far more meaningful. The chest contained dozens of photographs, bundles of letters, documents, certificates, newspaper clippings, and several journals. Each item represented a life Walter had touched. A family helped during difficult times, a student given an opportunity, a neighbor supported through hardship, a stranger shown kindness. The collection spanned decades. Daniel sat beneath the oak tree for hours, reading, learning, understanding. The deeper he explored, the clearer the truth became. Walter's greatest achievement wasn't his carpentry. It wasn't the homes he built. It wasn't the furniture he crafted. His greatest achievement was people, the lives he improved, the hope he created, the opportunities he provided. That was his true legacy. One final letter. At the very bottom of the chest rested a sealed envelope. Unlike the others, this one contained only 2 words. For Daniel. Daniel took a deep breath, then opened it. The letter inside was longer than expected, several pages, written shortly before Walter's death. The first sentence immediately captured his attention. If you are reading this, then you've discovered what I wanted you to find. Daniel continued. Not money, not possessions, not treasure, people. Tears filled his eyes. Walter's words felt alive, present, almost as though his father were sitting beside him beneath the tree. Everything valuable in my life came from relationships. The people I loved, the people who helped me, the people I tried to help in return. Daniel paused. The wind moved gently through the branches overhead. Then he continued reading, and what Walter revealed next would change the course of Daniel's life forever. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The truth about the last wish. Walter's final letter reveals the real purpose behind the clues, the hidden chest, and the legacy he hopes Daniel will continue after he's gone. Chapter 6. The truth about the last wish. The old man's last wish. The winter wind moved gently through the branches of the old oak tree. Daniel Hayes sat alone on the hillside, holding his father's final letter. The hidden chest rested open beside him. Photographs, journals, letters, decades of memories, all of it surrounded him. Yet at that moment, nothing mattered more than the pages in his hands. The pages Walter had written specifically for him. His final message, his final lesson, his final wish. Daniel took a deep breath and continued reading. A father's truth. Daniel, there is something I need you to understand. For many years, I believed success meant building things. Homes, furniture, businesses, projects. I thought those things would define my life. Daniel paused. The words sounded exactly like Walter. Practical, thoughtful, honest. He continued, but as I grew older, I realized something important. The things we build eventually wear out. Wood ages, buildings crumble, money disappears. Even our names are eventually forgotten. Daniel looked toward the valley below. The town seemed peaceful beneath the afternoon sunlight. Then he read the next sentence. What lasts is the good we leave behind in other people. The words struck him deeply, because they explained everything, the letters, the clues, the hidden chest, the journey. It was never about uncovering a secret. It was about understanding a truth. Why Walter helped others. The letter continued. Many people believed I was generous. The truth is simpler. Helping others help me. Daniel frowned slightly, then continued reading. Every time I helped someone through a difficult moment, I felt richer. Not financially, spiritually, emotionally, humanly. Walter described moments Daniel never knew existed. The widow whose home nearly collapsed during a storm. The young student who couldn't afford school supplies. The struggling family facing eviction. The injured worker unable to support his children. Time after time, Walter quietly stepped forward, never seeking attention, never seeking praise. Simply helping, because he could, and because someone needed him. The greatest regret. Eventually, the tone of the letter changed. The writing became more personal, more vulnerable. Despite everything I did right, I also made mistakes. Daniel's chest tightened. He already knew where this was leading. The greatest mistake of my life was allowing pride to come between us. For several moments, Daniel couldn't continue. The sentence blurred through tears. Eventually, he wiped his eyes and read on. I lost 23 years with my son. 23 years of birthdays. 23 years of conversations. 23 years I can never recover. The honesty hurt, because it was true. Both men had suffered. Both had lost time. Both had allowed pride to win. Yet Walter didn't stop there. I forgive myself. And I hope you forgive yourself too. Daniel stared at the words. For years, guilt followed him. He blamed himself, blamed Walter, blamed circumstances. Now for the first time, he felt something shifting inside, something healing. The real purpose of the journey. Walter's next words revealed the true purpose behind everything. You may wonder why I sent you across town chasing clues. A small smile appeared on Daniel's face. He definitely wondered, because lessons are rarely learned through explanations. They are learned through experiences. Walter understood something important. If he simply handed Daniel a letter and explained everything, the lesson might be forgotten. But by sending him on a journey, by allowing him to meet people, by letting him discover stories firsthand, the lesson became real, personal, unforgettable. I wanted you to see the lives behind the stories, the faces behind the kindness, the impact one person can have. Daniel nodded slowly. Now he understood. Every clue served a purpose. Every stop a piece of Walter's heart. Daniel turned the page. The final section of the letter began, and immediately he sensed its importance. Now I can finally tell you my last wish. The sentence seemed almost sacred. Daniel read carefully. I do not want a statue. I do not want a memorial. I do not want people speaking my name long after I'm gone. Those statements sounded exactly like Walter. He never cared about recognition, never cared about praise. Then came the wish. Simple, powerful, life-changing. I want you to continue the work. Daniel stared at the words. Continue the work. He read them again, then again. Walter explained further. Not because you owe me anything. Not because you must. Because helping people is one of the few things that truly matters. The message couldn't have been clearer. Walter wasn't passing down money, or property, or possessions. He was passing down responsibility. A responsibility to continue creating kindness, to continue creating opportunities, to continue creating hope. A new understanding. Daniel lowered the letter. The valley stretched before him. Quiet, beautiful, familiar, yet somehow different. For years, success had meant achievement, career growth, financial security, professional accomplishments. Those things still mattered. But now he saw something larger, something deeper, impact. Walter spent an ordinary life by most standards. He wasn't famous, he wasn't wealthy, he didn't change the world. Yet he changed hundreds of individual lives. And those changes spread outward, like ripples across water, touching more people than he would ever know. Perhaps that was what true success looked like. The return to town. As sunset approached, Daniel carefully packed the contents of the chest. The journals, the letters, the photographs. Nothing would be left behind. Not now. These stories deserved preservation. More importantly, they deserved continuation. When he returned to Maplewood Hollow, people immediately noticed a difference. Something about him had changed. His expression seemed softer, more thoughtful, more focused. Even Benjamin Clark noticed. "You found what you were looking for?" Daniel smiled. "More than that." The lawyer nodded knowingly. "Your father had a way of doing that." The workshop reopens. Several weeks later, Daniel made a decision, a major decision. One that surprised many people. Instead of returning immediately to the city, he stayed, at least temporarily. He reopened Walter's old workshop. At first, people assumed he planned to sell it, or renovate it, or transform it into a museum. Instead, Daniel had another idea. The workshop would become a place where people could learn. Young carpenters, students, anyone interested in developing skills. Classes would be free, tools would be available, knowledge would be shared. The same way Walter shared his knowledge throughout his life. The project began small, but quickly attracted attention and support and volunteers. The community embraced it, just as Walter would have hoped. One last entry. Late one evening, Daniel opened Walter's journal again. Near the final pages, he discovered an entry he had somehow missed. The handwriting appeared weaker than usual, written shortly before Walter's death. The entry contained only a few sentences. "I don't know how much time remains, but I am grateful. Grateful for Margaret. Grateful for Daniel. Grateful for every person who crossed my path." Then came the final line. The final sentence Walter ever wrote. "A life becomes meaningful when it improves the lives of others." Daniel closed the journal slowly, because now he understood. Completely understood. An understanding changed everything. A legacy worth continuing. The following spring, flowers bloomed across Maplewood Hollow. Life moved forward, as life always does. Yet Walter's influence remained everywhere. In homes, in schools, in friendships, in opportunities, and most importantly, in people. His last wish was no longer a secret. It was becoming a reality. One act of kindness at a time. One person at a time. One life at a time. But the most beautiful part of Walter's story was still waiting to unfold. Because the true measure of a legacy is not what happens during a lifetime, it is what continues afterward. And Walter Hayes was about to leave behind something extraordinary. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7, A Legacy of Kindness. Daniel fulfills his father's final wish and discovers how one person's kindness can continue changing lives long after they are gone. Chapter 7, A Legacy of Kindness. The old man's last wish. Spring arrived gently in Maplewood Hollow. The snow melted from the hills. Flowers began blooming along the roadsides. Birds returned to their nests. The entire town seemed to awaken from a long winter sleep. For Daniel Hayes, however, spring represented something more, a new beginning. For most of his adult life, he focused on building a successful career, designing buildings, winning contracts, growing his business, chasing goals. There was nothing wrong with those things. Yet now, standing inside his father's old workshop, he realized something had changed. His definition of success was no longer the same. Walter's final wish had planted a seed inside him, and that seed was beginning to grow. The community workshop. What started as a simple idea quickly became something much larger. Daniel transformed the old carpenter shop into the Hayes Community Workshop. The building remained familiar. The workbenches stayed in place. Walter's tools still lined the walls. But now the workshop served a new purpose. People gathered there to learn. Teenagers interested in carpentry, retired craftsmen eager to teach, parents hoping to develop practical skills, students looking for guidance. Every week, more people arrived. And every week, Daniel felt closer to understanding his father. Because helping others brought a kind of satisfaction he had never experienced before. A satisfaction no paycheck could provide. Walter's stories live on. Daniel also discovered another purpose for the workshop. One corner became home to Walter's journals. The letters, the photographs, the stories. Visitors often spent hours reading them. Many left emotional, some left inspired, others left determined to help someone in their own lives. The stories created something remarkable, a chain reaction. One act of kindness inspired another, then another, then another, exactly as Walter would have wanted. Soon, people throughout Maplewood Hollow began sharing their own stories. Stories of generosity, compassion, community. The collection continued growing, even after Walter's death. Hack Sarah's idea. One afternoon, Sarah Collins from the bakery visited the workshop. She carried a basket of fresh pastries. As usual, "You're creating something special here." Daniel smiled. "I'm trying." Sarah looked around. People worked together at various tables, young and old, experienced and inexperienced, all helping one another. Then she offered an idea. "What if we create a town fund?" Daniel looked curious. "A fund in Walter's name." The idea spread quickly. Residents loved it. The Walter Hayes Kindness Fund was established several months later. Its mission was simple: help people facing difficult circumstances, support education, assist struggling families, create opportunities. In other words, continue Walter's work. A letter arrives nearly a year after Walter's passing. Daniel received an unexpected letter. The envelope came from another state. The sender's name seemed unfamiliar. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Hayes, you do not know me, but your father changed my life." Daniel immediately sat down. The letter continued. The writer explained that years earlier, Walter helped her family after a devastating house fire. At the time, she was only a child. She never forgot his kindness. Today, she worked as a teacher, and after learning about Walter's story through a newspaper article, she wanted to express gratitude. The letter ended with a simple sentence. "Your father taught me that one act of kindness can echo for decades." Daniel read the line 3 times, because it perfectly summarized everything Walter believed. The ripple effect. Over time, more letters arrived. Dozens, then hundreds. Some came from former students. Others came from families Walter had quietly supported. A few came from complete strangers whose lives intersected with his in small but meaningful ways. Each story revealed the same truth. Walter's kindness never truly ended. It continued moving outward, touching lives long after the original act occurred, like ripples spreading across a lake. The realization fascinated Dan. Most people underestimate their impact. They assume small actions don't matter. Walter proved otherwise. A kind word, a helping hand, a moment of generosity. Those things often travel farther than we imagine. A visit to the oak tree. One evening, Daniel returned to the old oak tree, the same tree where he discovered the hidden chest, the same tree where he finally understood his father. The hill looked beautiful beneath the setting sun. The valley stretched endlessly below. Daniel sat beneath the branches and reflected. A year earlier, he arrived here searching for answers. Now he carried understanding, peace, purpose. The journey his father designed had worked, not because it revealed secrets, because it revealed values. The values Walter spent his life quietly living. The Children's Project. As the years passed, the workshop became a cornerstone of the community. One summer, local school children proposed a project. They wanted to create something honoring Walter. At first, Daniel worried. His father never wanted recognition, never wanted statues, never wanted attention. Then the children explained their idea. Instead of a monument, they would plant trees. Hundreds of them. One tree for every story of kindness collected in Walter's journals. The idea felt perfect, living, growing, useful. Exactly the sort of tribute Walter would appreciate. That autumn, families gathered across Maplewood Hollow. Together they planted hundreds of young trees. Years later, those trees would become a forest, a living reminder that kindness grows when shared. The final lesson. Several years after Walter's death, a young boy visited the workshop. He couldn't have been older than 10. After reading some of Walter's stories, he approached Daniel. "Mr. Hayes?" Daniel smiled. Yes? The boy looked thoughtful. Was your father rich? The question caught Daniel by surprise. For a moment he considered the answer. Walter never possessed great wealth. He wasn't famous. He didn't own large businesses. Yet somehow the answer felt obvious. Daniel smiled. Yes. The boy looked confused. Really? Daniel nodded. Very rich. How much money did he have? Daniel glanced around the workshop, at the people learning together, at the photographs, at the stories, at the lives still being changed. Then he answered, he had more than money. The boy frowned. What does that mean? Daniel smiled. It means he spent his life investing in people. The child thought about that for a moment, then slowly nodded, perhaps not fully understanding. Yet. A legacy that never ends. 20 years later, people still spoke about Walter Hayes. Not because he was famous, not because he was powerful, not because he was wealthy, because he was kind. The workshop continued operating. The Kindness Fund continued helping families. The forest continued growing. The stories continued inspiring others. Generation after generation, year after year, his legacy lived on. Not in buildings, not in possessions, not in trophies, in people. Exactly where Walter wanted it to live. The old man's last wish. Looking back, Daniel finally understood something important. Walter's final wish was never hidden inside the chest, or the letters, or the clues. Those things were merely tools. The real wish was much simpler. Walter wanted kindness to continue. He wanted people to help one another. He wanted love to outlast him, and it did, far beyond anything he could have imagined. Because the greatest legacies are not built from wealth, they are built from lives touched, hearts changed, and opportunities created. Moral of the story: money can be inherited, possessions can be passed down, but the greatest gift we leave behind is the kindness we show and the positive impact we make in other people's lives. A life becomes truly meaningful when it helps others, and that kind of legacy never dies. The end. The greatest inheritance is not what we leave for people, it is what we leave within them.